Alrighty, so I've got my sketches here again. Always a really, really good idea to have your sketches out with you. Obviously, that's going to tell you kind of the information that you need. If you remember me talking about sketches, I talked about them being a map to your project. Okay, so maps help us get to where we need to be. So I have not touched this much since I made this on Wednesday, I think. Wednesday, Thursday, whenever that was. Oh, my head rolled away. So I want to show you kind of how I had it all covered up. So I had it wrapped up and I separated the head from my body piece, okay? And what we really want to make sure that we've done, is this in the way from that? What we really want to make sure that we do before we really start adding features is make sure it's really nice and smooth, okay? A smooth surface is going to be easier to add things, and it's going to be easier to clean up in the end, okay? So we want to smooth as we go. So looking at my head and body, they're all right, but I see a lot of bumps and maybe some crummy pieces. So we really want to make sure that before we start all of our modeling, we have a really nice smooth surface. So a couple things that I'm going to start with. Smooth kidney, I always talk about the smooth kidney, is one of the best tools. So if we start, and you'll notice there's just a lot of like uneven bumps. So I'm just going to start kind of going every which way with the smooth kidney, and it kind of smooths out some of the bumps. It also makes some pieces that will then smooth away, but it really does a good job of getting rid of the unevenness of the clay. Okay, so then if we go over with a damp sponge, so I'm wringing it out almost completely. Once we go over with a smooth kidney, if you then look at that surface, so many of the bumps and lumps have gone away. Okay, so I smooth kidneyed kind of every which way, and then I'm going over with a very damp sponge. Okay, not sopping wet. We never want to make the surface of our clay slimy because that's going to make it really difficult to work with. Okay, if you have giant lumps and bumps that you don't want, another tool that you might try is the ribbon tool. Okay, clean ribbon tool is going to be easier to work with. But if you have like a giant lump or bump that you don't need, you can kind of scrape at it with the ribbon tool. Okay, and then same thing, go over with the damp sponge. Okay, so we want to make sure that we're starting with a really nice clean surface. And then also remember, kind of along the lines of not wanting to have a slimy surface, the more water that you add back to the clay, we might be going back from leather hard to slimy and soft again. And we know from previous experience that if our clay is really soft, it's a little bit messier as we start to add our details. And we really want it to be at what state of clay as we're starting to be a little bit more detailed. Leather hard. So that leather hard, that in between soft and dry, stiff yet workable. Okay, that's the best state of clay to carve into, to model, and to do most of our work. Okay, I am going to warn you, be very careful with the opening here. The more that you kind of move it around, because that's the thinnest part, it's going to want to kind of crack and break. So do be careful that you're not wiggling that opening around very much, okay? So do we see where that got a lot nicer than when I first opened it up, okay? So there's the head, so I'm going to put that to the side for a minute. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the body. So you can use the smooth kidney, you can use the ribbon tool. Fingers are also good because your fingers, you can kind of feel where the bumps are and push a little bit harder where you feel like the clay needs to be pushed in. Okay, so every which direction. At first it looks like it's making things worse, but then we go over with the sponge. And we're imagining that this is our panda body. Okay, I know it doesn't look like it yet. And then with the your post part, you can just kind of take that smooth kidney all the way down. Okay, and then again, damp sponge. Okay, and then when we go over with the damp sponge, it gets so much better. Okay, so make sure that you do you take the time to do all of this smoothing before you start adding all of your features and whatnot. Okay, so I'm gonna pretty quickly go over adding kind of arms, legs, and that kind of thing. I think the harder portion is definitely the head features. Okay, so looking at my panda, okay, if I'm looking at arms and legs, which are the basic things that I need to still add to make him actually look like something, I need basically snakes for the arms and legs. And the main thing when we are modeling characters, we don't want to make it look like I just like stuck a snake of clay on. If you think about your body, it doesn't look like you've just got this like random arm attached somewhere. It's actually part of your body. And so we want it to really look like we have attached an arm to our panda and it's part of his body. Okay, so I'm gonna wedge just for a quick minute, and then take a little bit of clay, and I'm gonna roll a little snake or a little coil. Okay, now for looking at this is a little bit thicker than 1/4 of an inch, but not like a giant solid piece of clay. Agreed? Okay, this is okay. If we're going much thicker than this, we've got to figure out a different way. So if, we had this whole thing, I would say that's too thick. Do you guys agree? That looks like too thick of a piece of clay to just attach on. We're risking explosion, right? So if you are having to add things that are much thicker, we've got to find another way to do it. So you could kind of make this kind of fashion a pinch pot like piece. Okay, so then we've got this. So if that needs to be the leg, but then what do we need if we attach this whole piece on? What have I created? An air pocket, right? So then I could vent in here. I think I can just do a snake considering the proportion. So you really want to be thinking about proportion. So the size of one object compared to another. Okay, so think about how big this foot and leg needs to be in comparison to the body. Okay, so I'm going to kind of look at my sketch here, and okay, so there's pretty good. I'm going to kind of smooth it out and get it looking kind of foot-like. Okay, so his feet come here. Now if I just stuck it on like that, that looks goofy, right? Do you guys agree? Okay, that looks goofy. So we have to make it look like part of his body. And what do I have to do if I'm attaching this? I have to slip and score. If I were to just kind of smooth this in, once my clay dries, it's gonna fall off. So we have to slip and score. So I'm gonna kind of decide where that's gonna go. And I would say that this is definitely the thickest that I would do as a solid piece of clay. Okay, so we're gonna, so score both, slip one. So I scored both pieces, slipped one, and I'm gonna get that on there. Okay, and then I'm really gonna try to smooth it in and really make it look like it's becoming part of his body. It's not just this like weird appendage that I added. Okay, so that might mean kind of squishing it around. Okay, kind of thinking about where that joint would be. Okay, if you were sitting down. I'm gonna say these tools are gonna be pretty awesome. The double-ended silicone tools. Okay, we want to make sure that there is definition where his foot attaches, but then that it actually kind of becomes part of his body. and then kind of thinking about that joint, okay? And then we would get the other one on there, and you kind of keep pushing it around, right? That's why we build when our clay is plastic, so we can kind of keep pushing it around. If it helps to look at an actual picture of whatever your character is, definitely do that, okay? His arms are gonna be very similar, okay? I would say his arms are probably gonna be slightly smaller coils, snakes, okay? And if these are his shoulders, okay, we think about where that's gonna come down, okay? So then I'm gonna slip and score that on, and then we can get into the nitty-gritty of his like paws and whatnot later. You initially just want to get the overall form, okay? So I'm gonna get that on there, and then again, we don't want it to look like it's just this like piece of clay that I stuck on there. That doesn't really look like it's a part of his body. It looks like I just stuck something on there. So we really want to make sure that we're smoothing it in, really making it look like he's got kind of a shoulder going on there. Okay. You can use the silicone tool to kind of close seams. Okay. I use my fingers a lot. Okay, so we want to get into those seams. Okay. So I really made it look pretty attached up by his shoulder, but then I let it be still a little bit separated down by his hand, because if you think about it, how that works, you want to see that there's a seam between his arm and his body, right? Okay, and then I can kind of pinch it around and keep working there, okay? So that's going to basically be features. And then just remember, we don't want thin, fragile projections. If you have arms just hanging out in the middle of space, they're going to want to break off when they start to dry. So make sure things are connected. So I know I talked about, like, if you have an arm, you don't want it hanging out here. Maybe you're going to attach the hand to the body. It's okay if there's some space, like where an elbow is, but we just don't want any thin, fragile projections that are just hanging out in space waiting to get bumped and broken off, okay? Now as we go to the head and face, okay, so now I'm going to go to my sketch that actually has my panda face on there, okay? As we go to that, if you think of a face is pretty symmetrical, right? If you cut your face in half, okay, yes, all faces are a little bit different, but it's got the same stuff on each side, right? So when we go to start the face of your character, assuming that all of your characters are about the same or symmetrical, I'm gonna go ahead and take one of the silicone tools, and I'm literally going to cut this in half. Well, not cut it. I'm gonna make a line, okay? Because my sides are gonna be very similar. I'm gonna have one eye on each side. I'm gonna have an ear on each side. So this will kind of help you get everything where it needs to be. So looking at my panda, and you can kind of look at each other as well. If you think about our eye sockets, the actual socket of our eye, if it was just our skull, it's an indent, right? So we can use that, and I would always kind of have your fingers up inside of the head part, because it'll help so that you don't just collapse the head of your bobblehead. So I'm gonna kind of look at my panda eye, and I'm literally gonna take my thumb and I'm gonna impress. So this is a form of our impression decorating technique here, okay? I'm gonna kind of impress in to make his eye socket, okay? So we've literally pushed into his head. If you're making a human, remember that the top of the head's actually here, and so you make sure that you don't like forget the forehead, okay? And then as I look at it, and again, even if you're making an animal, you can think about human features. So then eyeball, right? So I'm gonna take a piece of clay, eyeball, and I'm gonna slip and score that, make it a little bit smaller. Slip and score that in there. Okay, we're gonna slip and score everything, even if it's the tiniest little piece. Remember, if you can't get into an area with your scoring tool, you can just use a ribbon tool. Okay, and then I'm gonna slip and score that eyeball in there. Okay, now that looks kind of goofy because most animals, humans, living things have some sort of eyelid or hood or cover over their eye. So, okay, I got that on there. That looks super goofy, just having like an eyeball hanging out there. So then what we can do is just have like a little slab of clay, and you can kind of see, okay, so they pushed in with the thumb, they added the goofy eyebrows, and then we can take like a little slab or piece of clay to then put over the top. So again, even though it's a little piece of clay, we want to score and slip to kind of make the hood of the eye. Okay, I'm doing this pretty quickly, but there are lots of videos out there. I would say modeling a face is hard, but there are tons of tutorials out there, videos out there. Okay, I know I have a lot of smoothing to do, but that hood kind of makes it look a little bit more realistic. Eyelid, hood, whatever you want to call it. Agreed? Okay. So then we just want to keep figuring out what to do next. So for his nose, think of it as like a cone to start with. Okay. So things are going to look funny at first, but just always remember, we don't want it to look like we just stuck something on there. We want to make it part of the face, okay? So I'm going to start with this cone for his nose, okay? And his nose should go right on that center line that we drew. Okay. Okay, so if I just do that, that looks super goofy. Doesn't look like my panda nose. Okay, so then we're actually gonna make it part of, okay, part of his face. And then pandas tend to have like a little indented nose, kind of like cats, big cats, little cats, cats at the end of their nose. Okay. And then if I'm thinking about what his mouth looks like, I can just roll a thin piece of clay, okay, have that come down, slip and score that on. So you've got to think when it's smart to add and when it's smart to subtract and when it's smart to impress. Okay, engobe's going to come later. Engobe is really just an aesthetic detail. Okay, but if we're thinking about, okay, we don't want it to just be plopped on there. We want to make it part of his face. Okay, so I'm going to then, modeling tools, the wooden modeling tools will be good as well. Okay, and then I can kind of get that in there, push it around, and we're kind of starting to get, do you see where we're starting to get on that half? Okay, our panda, okay? So don't hesitate to watch tutorials. There's a lot of smoothing left to do on this guy, but I just want to show you we actually want it to become part of the face, not just like stuck on pieces of clay. Okay, and then for his ear's easy. Think about a slab of clay. Okay, I can form that into a panda ear. It's going to be a little bit thinner than 1/4 of an inch, but it's not huge or fragile projection. Okay, maybe a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to slip and score that on. Now when I slip and score his ear on, I want to show you one extra thing, and then I'll be done, promise. Okay, so I'm going to model his little ear into a little slab of clay. Okay, when I attach that on, Okay, I'm gonna slip and score that on. Okay, that's not a lot of clay that just connected together. It's just this thin little piece. So really make sure you either take a finger or a thumb and pull it down to really make sure that that ear attaches. It's almost like you're making like a rounded connection there, okay? And if you feel like there's really not a lot of clay that connected between the ear and the head, what you can do then is basically roll a little snake of clay, slip and score it into that seam, and then smooth it in. Does that make sense? Okay, and that'll help make a strong connection because we don't want to knock his ear off later. Okay, and so I'll keep working on this, and then, you know, the goal is that it'll bobble. Another thing to keep track of is balance. If you have a bobblehead that has like maybe a big nose or a lot going on in front, that's going to make it want to bobble forward. So then you might need to think about balance as you decide where that coil goes in the top of the head. Okay, so think about balance, make sure that everything's kind of working together so that it'll do what we need it to do. Okay, was that helpful? Okay, cool. Go for it. Hit that.